Hi, my name is David Partika, and I created CSS Burner as a rapid optimization tool for CSS. Today, I'm going to go over what all the various indicators look like and what they mean when you scan a style sheet. So, in the text area, I have already pasted an example style sheet that has various kinds of rules. For example, there's a media rule, here's a keyframes. And if we scroll down, there are a couple of additional declarations that we see. Okay, so let's click scan to bring up the scan menu. And I'm going to now select some of these checkboxes, not all of them. The indicators are here in the level of scanning detail, and this is where we can use additional indicators such as warnings and optimizations. Now keep in mind that warnings and optimizations have to be selected as additional levels of detail for your scan, but by default, errors will always be shown. No matter if you have a free account or if you have Premium Plus, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we're going to select a couple of other options here. Now, Dissect is available only for Premium and Premium Plus members, and it is an option where your style sheet is scanned with a much greater level of detail to catch some additional errors. However, the scan will take a little bit longer as a result. And finally, let's make sure that we get suggestions in our scan. And let's scan the style sheet. So within a split second, we get a completed scan, and a dialog box pops up and explains to us that there were issues found, and the errors are in red, the warnings in yellow, the optimizations in orange, and suggestions are violet. Okay, so let's take a look at these various indicators, and from top down, the order will always be errors, warnings, optimizations, suggestions. Okay, so we start with errors. Now, errors are in red, and now in a massive style sheet, you're going to have to slowly scroll through here, but here we see that most of the markup is already in the window, and so we could spot two errors. Now we see that there's this one here, and there's this one down here. And so what you can do is you could connect the scan output with the report details by simply clicking on the indicator. So in this case, let's start down here. So we see that, oh, that was supposed to be visible. So there is no visible for the property visibility. And so we click on this, and we see up here briefly highlighted the corresponding report entry. Okay. And now we see one more error. Clicking it corresponds to report entry number 2 for errors. And the mouse over tells us that, oh, BBB is not a valid token for animation. So for the animation property, you need to reference a keyframes rule in the style sheet. And just looking up, you see that there's AAA, but there is not BBB. So that will break your style sheet because there is no way for that animation to properly run. And therefore, that is an error. That is the definition of error. Same with this property here. It's supposed to be visible. So with visibility, visible, there's no way for the style sheet to know, or for the renderer to know what exactly you mean. And so this will break your style sheet, and will break your CSS. So these are errors. Okay, now the next category is warnings. Now warnings are correspond to markup in your style sheet that won't break anything. However, you need to know that there is some issue with that markup that, may be important or may not, depends on your use case. And so these are warnings. So let's start from the top here, and we click, and we see that this first warning is highlighted. A deprecated media type. Embossed is no longer supported. It has been deprecated. Now, it was recognized previously as a perfectly fine invalid media type, but you no longer need it. It's no longer being going to be used in modern browsers. So it's up to you. I mean, maybe there's some old browser that you need support for, or maybe not. So you make that decision. But it was brought to your attention. That's a warning. Okay, we see some other ones here. For example, okay, we see that display is flagged as a warning here. And why is that? It's because now you might have forgotten that you used the display rule or whatever rule was flagged as a warning. You may have forgotten that you already had one in that declaration. Now, in this particular case, it's just due to the user wanting, or the author of the style sheet wanting to get maximum browser coverage by using the various Flexbox vendor prefixed values. However, it's not always the case. Sometimes there are cases where, especially in large declarations, that you may have forgotten somewhere near the top that you already have a display none or whatever the property is. So let's go to one more warning down here. And what is this? So let's click it. We see, oh, that's a deprecated syntax. Modern browsers recognize linear gradient. You don't necessarily need to vendor prefix it. However, you might be supporting that old version of Firefox or Internet Explorer. So CSS Burner is just bringing it to your attention. Now, these are warnings. So, okay, let's move on to the next category of indicator, optimizations. Now, optimizations are, again, your markup is fine. And whatever you wanted to render on your web page or on your app, it's going to render. However, as we know, leaner style sheets will, they will be downloaded or parsed more quickly. So you might want to consider getting rid of unnecessary markup. Now, these are what optimizations are for. So we start at the top, and let's click it. You see, oh, what's going on? We see that, let's get rid of this. We see that an attribute selector only requires quotation marks if there are escapable characters. And this is just a title attribute that's a string without any spaces. Spaces would be would need the quotes because they're escapable. But this is just a very simple string, ABC. You don't need the quotes there. All right, now let's move down a little bit more. And we see, okay, linear gradient. And the direction to bottom, by default, is, that is the default for linear gradient. You don't need to include it as a function argument here. So let's click it. If we want to read more about it or more about exactly what's going on, you could either you could go to the YouTube video, or you could read in the sources for this particular item in optimization. A couple more optimizations here. This declaration block is repeated. Okay, so I click on it. And what does that correspond to? It corresponds to optimization number 4. But somewhere in your style sheet, there is a repeat of color red and display block. Oh, and here it is right here. Rule number 3. Okay, so, and what you would do then is you would simply group with a comma. You would group, so div.a, comma H1, and then that would be your new rule here, and you would get rid of this one. But however, we see that there's another optimizable piece of markup here, and this is that a block element such as H1, you don't need to again declare that the display is block, because by default that's what browsers recognize, H1 or paragraph or divs. That's what's recognized, that they're a display block. So it's unnecessary to do that. So those are optimizations. These are things that we could somehow condense or even get rid of completely, like this display block. It doesn't have to be there. Now finally, let's talk about suggestions, which is the last category here for indicators. Suggestions are in purple, and when we scroll down the style sheet a bit, we see several suggestions. Now the first one is in block number 6, and the suggestion, because again this markup is not incorrect, the suggestion is simply trying to bring something to your attention that's it's not even something that's deprecated. It's just markup that maybe it could be trimmed, it could be modified in some way, but it's really it's not incorrect, and there's no way to tell. So we're just CSS Burner suggesting to you that you might want to do something or add something with the markup. And so here, when we click, we see that, okay, the second suggestion is lit up here. And let's just, again, see exactly what it is. Make sure the element P really needs to be included before the ID in this selector. And the reason is because typically an ID is unique in a document. And so you shouldn't have to say that, oh, this is the paragraph identifier C, or this is the div identifier C. Now, if you have a more complicated project where a style sheet is used across several different pages, it's possible that you might have, say, in one page you might have a div that has that identifier, and in another page it might be, a paragraph. But typically that's not the case. So here's a suggestion: just get rid of it. But again, your project, okay? And then finally, we see suggestions here that the WebKit keyframes rule with that identifier, that was suggested to maximize browser coverage. Now, up here, we did have a keyframes rule, and now remember, modern browsers do recognize unprefixed keyframes. However, older browsers might still need the prefix, and if you care about that older version of IE or Firefox, whatever the case may be, you might want to include these suggested keyframes here. And so we saw that since we just had the unprefixed version, what CSS Burner did is it suggested all the prefixed versions as additional keyframes rules. So again, you click on any one of them to see where the suggestion is in the list of suggestions in the report. So just to sum up, the 4 indicators are errors, warnings, optimizations, and suggestions. And the colors that correspond to each indicator are going to be the when it's summed here, this number. So errors are red, warnings yellow, optimizations orange, and suggestions are purple. And suggestions again are visible only for Premium and Premium Plus members, but in the other 3 cases, errors, warnings, optimizations, any user can see these. And so here are, this was a brief tutorial for what these indicators mean. And I hope that this makes your scanning and optimizing much easier. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I always welcome feedback. So thank you, and please subscribe if you have not already subscribed to the Optimized CSS channel. Thank you.